I think it's clear to everyone that's followed it that the war on drugs has been just a complete failure. Now, the question is, what is the real solution to ridding societies of the drug problem? And the question gets even more complicated when you bring in opioids, with a recent study launched by Harvard Medical School saying that deaths during opioid-driven hospital stays have quadrupled. Now, while I think it'll take multiple approaches working together to actually solve this problem, one of the solutions I want to focus on in this video is decriminalization. So in 2001, Portugal decriminalized all drugs, and since then have seen a dramatic drop in overdoses, HIV infection, and drug-related crime. So The Guardian has a great piece detailing the events that led up to decriminalization and what happened afterwards. Portugal became the first country to decriminalize the possession and consumption of all illicit substances. Rather than being arrested, those caught with a personal supply might be given a warning, a small fine, or told to appear before a local commission, a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker, about treatment, harm reduction, and the support services that were available to them. So the important point here is not only is the drug user not treated as a criminal, but then they actually meet with a lawyer, a doctor, and a social worker to figure out what the next steps are. So if they do have an addiction, then they need to figure out how to get into harm reduction and maybe rid themselves of a drug problem that they might have. So after Portugal implemented this system, here's what happened. The opioid crisis soon stabilized, and the ensuing years saw dramatic drops in problematic drug use, HIV and hepatitis infection rates, overdose deaths, and drug-related crime and incarceration rates. HIV infection plummeted from an all-time high in 2000 of 104.2 new cases per million to 4.2 cases per million in 2015. So the bottom line is it worked. Now, what I love about how Portugal approached this is not even just what the government implemented, but also how the culture changed. And something as simple as the language that was used to discuss people that use drugs. Those who had been referred to sneeringly as drogados or junkies became known more broadly, more sympathetically, and more accurately as people who use drugs or people with addiction disorders. This too was crucial. So by changing the language around people who use drugs, what it does is it allows people to be more open-minded in maybe getting help. Because a lot of times if you feel like you're being treated as just, a second-class citizen, as an addict that's been left behind by society, then you don't feel welcome in your own society. You don't feel welcome to actually go and ask people for help because you don't feel like you really deserve it. But when you are treated as a person who may just have an addiction disorder or a person who uses drugs, it allows that person to really feel like they are welcomed and are willing to go seek the help that they need. Now, there are three pillars here that to Portugal's decriminalization that I think are so key. Portugal's policy rests on three pillars. One, that there's no such thing as a soft or hard drug, only healthy and unhealthy relationships with drugs. Two, that an individual's unhealthy relationship with drugs often conceals frayed relationships with loved ones, with the world around them, and with themselves. And three, that the eradication of all drugs is an impossible goal. Now, I think these three pillars are absolutely key to the solution. Now, let me just quickly go through each of them. So the first one, there's no such thing as a soft or hard drug. Now, some of you out there may think that's ridiculous because obviously, meth is worse than cannabis. But the idea behind having no such thing as a soft or hard drug is it takes the focus really off the drug and onto whatever issue may be going on in that person's life that is causing them to turn to drugs for relief in the first place. And that goes into number two. So the second pillar, it may conceal frayed relationships. So when you actually look at people that are addicts, oftentimes there's other things going on in their life. They're not just addicts for no reason. They're oftentimes addicts because maybe they're homeless, maybe they're depressed, maybe they have serious anxieties, maybe they're going through something in their life that's really bothering them and they need an escape. So there are a whole number of reasons why people turn to drugs and then sometimes become addicts. So when you actually look at the root cause of why that person turned to drugs in the first place, then you could get closer to the solution and getting that person off that drug. Now, the third pillar here is also just perfect because it states you cannot eradicate drugs. And that's just a fact. And that, it goes completely against the war on drugs. The idea that somehow we can eradicate the world of these substances. No, we can't. A lot of them grow naturally on Earth. You can't just eradicate the world of them. So when you realize that, then you begin looking at the actual root causes, which again goes back to pillar 1 and pillar 2. So it really removes the actual drug out of the issue and looks at the person. And what does that person need? What is that person going through? And how can we fix that problem in order to get them off the drug that they may be addicted to? Now, a lot of this really echoes what Dr. Carl Hart says. So Dr. Carl Hart is a neuroscientist and a drug abuse specialist. And if you haven't heard of him, look him up because he really understands what the root cause of addiction is. And he states many times that drugs themselves aren't the problem. The first thing I would do, said Hart, a medical doctor and associate professor of psychology at Columbia University, I would make sure that we stop arresting people. Drugs are often used as a scapegoat for other problems, such as poverty and crime, said Hart, adding that drugs are not as addictive as we've been told. Hart said the vast majority of people who use drugs like crack cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine are not addicted and are able to go to work, pay taxes, bills, and take care of their families. When you have this relatively small percentage of users becoming addicted, it tells you that it's not the drug itself. So this is all going to sound crazy to people who don't follow this news, but you have to think of it this way. When you hear about drugs in the media, it's only because people are either addicted or they're dying. You don't hear about the Wall Street millionaire who used cocaine last month while he was partying, or you don't hear about the lady that used psilocybin mushrooms to rid herself of depression. You only hear about drugs when people are dead or addicted. So there is this culture around drugs, around the word drugs, that has caused, in many ways, the war on drugs, when really the substance isn't the problem. It's whatever's going on in that person's life. Maybe it's personal relationships. Maybe they're poor because of income inequality. Maybe there's something else going on that is causing them to go to drugs to help medicate their life or whatever personal issues happening in their life. So when you look at it that way and do it the way Portugal has done it, by actually looking at the individual and not just the substance, you begin to get closer to the actual solution.